Hi, I'm John Wayne Falbey. I'm the author of the Sleeping Dogs series of thrillers. To date, there are 4 books in the series, and more are on the way. This is a reading from the most recent book, The Dogs of War. I hope you enjoy it. Chapter 14, The Lodge. The meeting was being held in the large underground chamber beneath the library that doubled as a wine cellar and boardroom. Lavelle was seated in his customary position at the middle of the table. Nando stood a few feet behind him. Rafe Almeida walked slowly among racks of wine bottles. A thin layer of dust stylishly coated each bottle.
"Leave the fucking wines alone, Almeida,"
Lavelle said in his familiar rasp.
"There'll be plenty of time for you to booze it up after the meeting."
Nick Stinson said, "And it won't involve the pricey stuff you're fondling." "Yeah," Quentin Thomas said. "Rafe can get by just as well with a bottle of rubbing alcohol. Those high-priced vintages would wreck his stomach." Sven Larsson said,
"He prefers to strain Vitalis through rye bread and drink that."
Stinson said, "And then he makes a sandwich with the bread." Almeida turned toward the others in the room and said, "Keep it up, assholes, and I'll lay waste to this whole fucking dungeon. No one will survive." He eyed Nando, who was staring at him with a stone-faced expression. Well, except for Cliff, that is," Almeida added quickly. Seated across the table from Lavelle, Whalen grinned. It was getting to be like old times again. With the exception of Mark Kirkland, the sleeping dogs were back together. And just like old times, the others were mercilessly ragging on Rafe Almeida. He always had been the group's Omega Wolf, the lowest one on the totem pole. Whalen understood why. Although Almeida had the same rare genetic gifts as the other dogs, he was a natural-born fuck-up. Still, it was difficult for rough men not to like him. He could drink all of them under the table, and his adventures as a skirt chaser were legendary. There was a heavy stone slab at the top of the steps that led to the library above. It slid open, and Mitch Christie trotted quickly down the steps. He took the vacant chair on Lavelle's right and nodded at Whalen. Lavelle said,
"All right, the whole gang's here. Sit your ass down, Almeida, and let's get this show on the road."
There were a few moments of silence, broken by the scraping of chairs on the rough stone floor, as those present pulled closer to the table.
"Men, the future of this country is a greater risk than it ever has been. Despite the efforts of our own shadow government, diplomacy isn't working. The fucking administration is destroying the country faster than we can counter them. The same is true of our efforts to establish useful military alliances. As a result, your unique talents are needed now more than ever."
The red dots in Stinson's eyes flared in striking contrast to the darkened atmosphere of the wine cellar. "Sounds like you have a kill list for us. When do we start?" Lavelle shook his head.
"That comes later, when we have the luxury of time. Right now, we have a disaster happening here in the homeland. It's too late to stop it completely, but we have to root out and destroy what we can as quickly as possible. Once that's done, we can focus on killing the bad actors in other parts of the world, the bitch who leads the caliphate, and those bearded rug merchants running Iran."
Thomas leaned forward. What's this disaster you mentioned?"
"I assume all of you have seen the latest news,"
Larsson said, with what passed as a grin for him.
"You mean Comedy Central, a.k.a. the ongoing presidential campaign?" "Very funny, wise ass. No, I was referring to the incident on the border in New Mexico."
There were nods around the table.
"I'm going to let Agent Christie here explain what's going on. But before he begins, there's someone else who wants to join us."
Lavelle motioned to Nando. The Brazilian pulled a cell phone from his pocket and spoke softly into it.
"Send him down."
The stone slab silently slid open again. For a moment, the opening was backlit by light from the library above. Then a large figure filled the space. All heads turned to watch as the man descended the stone steps. He was a big man, about Whalen's size, with longish blond hair and the deep tan of a man who spent much of his time outdoors. But his most striking feature was his eyes. Like Whalen's and the other dogs, they were bright, deep glacial blue. The room fell silent as everyone stared at the newcomer. He stopped on the bottom step and looked at each of the other men.
Good day, mates.
Whalen, a big grin on his face, stood up and walked over to the man, extending his hand to him. Looks like my selling job worked on you, Liam.
You made it sound interesting, mate. Working on a cow station can get a bit boring after a while, so I thought I'd check you out.
Stone looked around the room again.
These the blokes you told me about? Bloody freaks like you and me?
Except for Cliff Lavelle, Whalen nodded at the man in the wheelchair. And the man on his right, Mitch Christie. The man standing behind Cliff is Nando. He doesn't say much, but he's cool. He turned to face the others at the table. Men, this is Liam Stone. He's an Aussie.
Limestone? What the hell kind of name is that?
That's Rafe Almeida, Whalen said. He's our version of a class clown.
Stinson said, more like an ass clown.
Ignore Rafe, he's the run of the litter.
Yeah, we keep him around here for entertainment.
More likely target practice.
Almeida half rose from his chair. Keep it up, motherfuckers. I'll rip the asses off every fucking one of you.
He also suffers from delusions of grandeur,
Larson said with a slight grin. It was his good grin, meaning women and children might faint, but no one was about to die. All right, for the last time, get off Rafe's ass, Whalen said. At least for the remainder of this meeting. After that, you can go back to playing grab-ass on your own time. Whalen waved Stone to a vacant chair. He gave the others in the room the elevator speech about the Aussie's background, particularly his service with Tag West, Australia's version of the Navy SEALs. He closed by stating the obvious. Liam has the same genetic construct we all have. At Cliff's suggestion, I asked him to check us out. If he likes what we do, and he checks out okay by our standards, we just might have a new dog in the pound. There was a welcoming chorus from the men at the table. Stone smiled and said, "My mates call me Stoney." "Cool name," Almeida said. "Maybe we can get stoned sometime." Lavelle slammed the edge of his fist against the top of the table.
Damn it. Let's get back to business.
He turned toward Christie.
Finish telling us about the raid in New Mexico.
As usual, the news reports are just the tip of the iceberg. The official report is that a group of Border Patrol agents and sheriff's deputies stumbled upon drug smugglers armed with automatic weapons. The agents and deputies all died in the ensuing firefight.
Yeah,
Larson said, nodding his head slowly.
That's what headline news is saying.
Fox News, too, Stinson said. To repeat, that's the official version, Christie said. And the real story is, Whalen said? The real story is that the agents didn't stumble upon anyone. They were intercepting a group of illegals that had been picked up on FLIR, forward-looking infrared. Forensics has determined that they were gunned down from behind. In other words, there was another group that sneaked up behind them. Christie paused. And there's an eyewitness. Although some of the victims were killed execution style, with a gunshot to the head at close range, one managed to survive. And gentlemen, that information is not to leave this room. You saying the ambushers came at them from the U.S. side? Thomas said. Yes. If it was drug smugglers, Whalen said, was it MS-13? They'd become entrenched on this side of the border. Yeah, MS-13 likely played some part, Christie said. And smuggling definitely was involved, but it wasn't drugs, it was human smuggling.
Same old. Just people trying to find a better life for themselves and their families. And most of the time they're willing to work at jobs Americans won't touch, Larson said.
Almeida said, Shit, Larson, I hope we don't drown in the outpouring of your bleeding heart. What else did the official version distort or omit? Whalen said. Well, for one, these weren't poor campesinos. It's far worse than that. If it wasn't about drugs and illegal workers, what was it? Stinson said. Christie looked around the table. There was a grim expression on his face. Jihadis, specifically members of the Holy Army of the Caliphate. HAC, Almeida said, shaking his head. Shit, those are some bad motherfuckers. No shit, Thomas said. Just between us, there already are thousands of them here in the United States. They're spread out in cells throughout the land, in villages, towns, and cities. They're heavily armed with automatic weapons, RPGs, sophisticated explosives, the whole 9 yards. And they've carefully mapped out strategic sites, including military and first responder facilities, communications and power grids, and innumerable soft targets like malls, schools, and other public facilities. And they're just waiting for the signal, Whelan said. Yes, there's absolutely no reason to doubt that a massive nationwide strike is coming, and soon. I assume there's a tie-in with the attack on the border guards, Whelan said. Yes, we think it served 2 purposes. One was to make a statement that HHC is in control, not us.
And the second?
Thomas said. We have intel that suggested the smugglers brought something unusual with them.
Like what?
Stinson said. We're not positive, but we're reviewing satellite coverage of the incursion. It appears that traces of radioactivity were present.